Warning. Disillusioned podcast covers distressing themes such as coercive control, domestic violence, sexual assault, suicide, abuse, and human trafficking. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Disillusioned Podcast. I'm your host, Ari Sherwood. Today, we have a very special guest, Richard Kears, a cult survivor and advocate, author of Swindled by Faith. How's it going, Richard?
It's going fantastic. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Actually, today's been a really good day.
Fantastic.
So I'm really excited to hear about your cult experience. I don't know anything about this group. So I really would like to actually start from the beginning. Well, I guess the name of your cult, but also, or the cult that you are from, but also how you got recruited.
Well, the cult itself, let's start with the cult and the history a little bit of the cult. The cult itself is called the Move, or the Move of God. And it was founded in early 1960s by a gentleman named Sam Fife. And he was a Baptist minister, ordained Baptist, and he was also into country music. And he was a musician with a guitar, and he was writing songs and writing his own music and stuff like that. So he was quite into the front, being in the front, type of thing where people see him and like him. And he ended up being excommunicated from the Baptist church because his opinions and his point of view were too radical and they couldn't handle that. So he started his own church and moved to Florida. And in Florida, he recruited people to join his group. And eventually the group started to expand to different communities. And eventually it was all around the world. And by the time I was in it in 1970, 72, at the peak, there was about 44,000 people in the group.
Wow.
Now the group has dwindled down to, they say it's around 4,000 people. I don't even know if there's that many anymore because they're getting old and lots of them are dying off and they're not recruiting a lot of new people anymore. So,
yeah, like they didn't evolve with the times. And
well, God keeps changing his mind too. So I think some of the people got fed up with that. So
inconsistency. Yeah, totally.
So that's the gist of the move itself. And then you asked how we were recruited. Well, I was 10 years old when my parents were recruited into this. So I don't know how that happened. I do know that it was many years later that I did some research and spoke to some of the people that were my dad's friends prior to him going in. And they gave me some background on my dad that I never knew about. First of all, they moved from Holland to Canada in 1956, and they moved here for numerous reasons. I mean, Canada was kind of a place where the Europeans were coming to settle and grow. But in my dad's case and in my dad's family, it was kind of the morality in Holland was going downhill. Girls were wearing shorter skirts, boys were wearing longer hair. Things were really, and the church wasn't doing anything about it. Even when it came to Canada, by the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, long hair and short skirts were pretty prevalent in our church too. And my dad just hated that. Like that was totally against his belief system. So when he found this group, which was adamant about how people had to dress and what you could say and who could be your friends, and they totally had control over him. And so my dad loved that because that was right up his alley, right? So they ended up joining, and that's how we became involved. I was 10 years old.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. So your dad was definitely much more, he was in his ways. Christianity has changed a lot,
Some Christianity has, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Like not all of them, but there's just different churches and
exactly, yes.
Things are definitely
there are definitely different churches even now than there were back then. Like now they have churches with their own bands and drums and steel guitars and all the things that churches at one time, and not that many years ago, considered to be absolutely evil. So yes, churches and religion have evolved somewhat.
So you basically grew up in this group.
I remember life before the farms. I remember life before the move. I don't think my younger siblings really have a lot of recollection of that. My older siblings certainly would. And and when we got there, of course, going there was exciting because it was something new. And as kids, it's like going to Disneyland. It's exciting at first until you stand in a lineup for 7 hours. And that's basically what happened with this. It was very exciting to go there and get there. But once we got there and reality started to hit in, things changed.
Oh,
So,
yeah. What kind of changes happened for you?
well, uh, initially, basically the first thing that happened was we were basically taken from childhood to adulthood overnight.
Oh,
We,
wow.
like we had roads to build and a farm to set up and houses to build, and because there was absolutely nothing there when we got there, we lived in trailers,
Mm-hmm.
and everything was done by hand. There was no equipment to do things with, and so it was a lot of work. And as a 12-year-old, I was 12 when we moved up there, and as a 12-year-old, I was expected to work like a man. And so were all the other young men that were there. And at first, we didn't care. It was fun. But once you start
Mm-hmm.
getting tired and you start realizing that now all of a sudden you're slave labor, uh, things change. Your attitude changes, your feelings change, and you lose that desire to want to be there anymore. And it didn't take
Right.
long for that to happen.
Yeah. So how long do you think? Like probably almost right away, or do you think it took?
Well, we lived in the trailers for 4 months before we got our cabins built, and I was already completely turned off by the time we got into our cabins. So the first 4 months that we were up there, I was done. But there were circumstances that led to that. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just two circumstances that really stand out were with my dad. My dad became really sick, and he was laying in a trailer bed, and he was crying and moaning and wailing like he was in so much pain. And we were basically told that God was just testing his faith. They refused to take him to
Mm-hmm.
the hospital. And so he laid there for days and days. And then one of the older guys came into our trailer one day and said there was a pretty good chance that he was going to die because he didn't seem to have enough faith in God. So be prepared for that. And as a 12-year-old kid, that's pretty hard to deal with.
Yeah.
And so I started losing faith in God at that time. That's when I stopped believing in God. And
Yeah.
another circumstance was when I had this tractor that I had brought with me it was a bulldozer thing that I brought with me from Ontario when we moved. And I was playing with it after dinner one night out in the sticks. And this older gentleman came to me with a shovel and he made me dig a hole and put it in the hole and bury it. And I know he was trying to teach me something, but he patted me on the back and said, "Now you're a man. You're not a kid anymore." You know, but when you're 12 years old, you don't always understand that. Like that was very hurtful. And that
Right.
stuck with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. That that no 12-year-old child should have to go through, and it seems so prevalent too in cults. Child labor, um, slave labor. I know different ones. Like I know the 12 tribes. If you've heard of 12 tribes,
Yes, yes.
I think they do similar practices. And they got like
Well,
5-year-olds out there gardening
yeah.
for their business, and
Well, and the thing that the interesting thing about it is that we talk about slave labor, child labor, but it was actually almost slave labor because everybody worked their asses off on the farm and nobody got paid for anything.
right.
And then in the later years, when I was about 15 years old, they started allowing some of the younger boys and some of the older men would go out and get jobs working in the logging industry, but they had to give their paychecks to the farm. So they would work,
Mhm.
but never made any money. Like nowadays, that's pretty illegal. And I think that was illegal then too. But the thing is that happened and it happened all the time. And that's slave labor. That's what that is. You know,
That is, yeah,
they had a place to live and they had a place to sleep and they had food but they weren't allowed to keep the money. The money went to the farm. So that was, yeah. And I hear of that in so many of the interviews that I do. Like there are so many people that ended up working and getting jobs and their paychecks went straight to the leadership all the time or to
hmm
the farms or to the community or wherever, whatever it was. They weren't all on communes and farms like we were, but a lot of it went to leadership. There's one in California, for example, who's doing time in jail now because of tax evasion. But the people that I've spoken to from that cult, they worked for years picking almonds and picking avocados and working their buns off and getting $5 a week and the rest of it went to him. And he just became a multimillionaire. Like now he's doing time for tax evasion, but it's too bad that that's the only thing they can get them on. You know, there should
Yeah,
be some form of abuse related to that, because it is abuse. It's not just tax evasion, it's abuse of people.
right. That's exactly what it is. And yeah, that happened in my cult as well. That's, people had jobs and then come home, all their tip money, all their cash, just hand it over like nothing, just not even thinking about it. They just hand it over
Yeah.
and no one even thought about it.
And you just hit the nail on the head. When you're in a group like that and you're handing your money over, you don't even think about it, because it's just the way it is. It's totally normal. You're just giving it, you give it, you give it, you give it. That it's normal. And I
Right.
think that there are some people that eventually start realizing that it's not working for them, and they end up rebelling or turning their backs on it and leaving. But in a lot of these groups, you become an apostate, and then you're treated really, and then
Hmm.
you're kicked away, you're sent away. And the irony of that is they send you away, but they don't give you any money. The money you
Yeah.
earn stays with them. So you end up being destitute out there trying to make a living. How many people that I've talked to that know people that have committed suicide because they had nowhere to go. They couldn't get over the pain.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, what do you do after that? And when they're everything, you're dependent on them, even though you're the one giving away your money and time and resources, you're still
Absolutely.
dependent on them. I think a
Absolutely.
big struggle there is in regaining your independence. You have to learn how to do your life again, like how to organize your life yourself and
Yeah.
not have someone else, without another person doing that. And that's definitely a big struggle.
I'm finding that there are so many people that even in our group that we talk to many times now, that they've come in there and they're just lost. Like they've been away for 3 or 4 weeks. There's one particular one that's only been out for 3 or 4 weeks, and she's so lost. And I talk to her on a regular basis, and so does Melody, which is another lady in our group. We're talking to her regularly. We're trying to just coach people a little bit. We're not therapists, so we have to be careful how we deal with this, but we try to coach people on how to deal with things just a little bit at a time, instead of trying to handle everything all at once. So, and I think the important things that I found, where you have to learn to get up in the morning and do something, find something to do, even if you have to go to the gym or you have to go for a walk, uh, get some fresh air, make sure you have a good breakfast and eat. And people don't realize how important it is to get your body into good shape so that you can get your mind back into good shape and earn your independence. And it's really scary. It's scary for these people. They're coming out of this great big world that they were told was so bad. Example, I was told the day before I left, I was told that within a month or two, I was going to be found dead in a back alley, and I was going to be an
Hmm.
alcoholic and a drug addict. And there was no, this could happen, be careful. It was, this will happen. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
And so for the first little while that I left, I wasn't too worried about it because I was in pretty good hands. I found some people that I could live with, that really treated me well and took me in, and they were just amazing people. But not everybody has that opportunity.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I was able to get myself back into the real world a little bit at a time, slowly, without just being thrown into it like a fish out of water. So
Yeah.
it's very difficult for somebody, though, when they leave and they've got nothing. And not only do you not have anything, but when you go into these groups, you lose your family and you lose all your friends that you had, because you're told
Hmm.
you're not supposed to associate with them anymore. But then when you leave 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10 years later, you now have to leave everybody else behind too that was in the group. So you have nothing.
Right.
So what you have to do then is you have to rekindle relationships from before that you went in, just so that you can have a connection to the real world again and you can start rebuilding. And that's why, as much as Facebook, I think, is a serious problem in this world in many ways, but Facebook is really good too, because I was able to reconnect with people that I knew before I went in, when I was still a kid. And I reconnected with some of them. We became friends again. Uh,
Hmm.
and I was able to find my relatives. Can you imagine if you still had to do that with a piece of paper and a pencil? Like, it
Hmm.
would take forever. You go on
Yeah.
Facebook now, you punch in the name, and there they are. So use those resources for good. find the people that you got along with before and get back in touch with them. Find new friends. Don't allow yourself to be exploited. Lots of people get exploited because you don't
Yes.
have the ability to really protect yourself from exploitation because you don't know anything about it. So you can
Hmm.
be ripped off at work. You can be ripped off by friends. You can be ripped off by people around you. So yeah, it's very important to connect with people and then find people you can trust. And then one day at a time. This is something that I tell everybody. Don't try to look at next week. Don't try to look at next year. Where am I going to be? What am I going to do? Do it one day at a time. Get up in the morning, deal with today, go to bed. Next morning, get up, deal with the day, go to bed. If you start trying to put too much together, it overwhelms you. And I've seen way too many suicides and way too many, people going through serious depressions because they just see the big picture and can't handle it. You have to break it down into small pieces, and it makes it
Yep.
much easier. It's not easy, but it's easier.
And it takes time. It's something that, for myself, like it's been it's been what, 11 years now. And I'm still working through everything. I'm
Well,
still doing
it's been almost 50 years for me, and I was being interviewed a couple of weeks ago, and I had to take a break because I started crying and I couldn't stop.
that. Hmm.
So there are things that still hurt, and it will for the rest of your life. That's just reality. But you have to learn over time that it's okay to feel those things.
Yeah.
There's
And
nothing wrong with having feelings and emotions. It's understanding where they're coming from and learning how to work through it. It's there's no problem with that at all.
yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up too, because, the focus can be so much on the cult and the cult dynamics and the cult leaders and all those things when there's this whole entire journey the moment you leave that group that, needs to be talked about because it's such exactly people are homeless. They don't have anyone. They do commit suicide, and it can be so confusing. It is absolutely confusing when you leave, because now you have to decide what you believe in, and forming your own values and reclaiming your agency. So all those, and they're huge struggles.
Yeah.
Huge. I think a lot of the struggles come after you leave, for a lot of people. It's like
Yeah.
once that reality hits you,
Well,
that
this is one of the reasons why I set up the private group Silent Voices on Facebook, is because I went to several cult support groups, and all everyone talks about is not all of them, but most of them. They talk about the cults and they talk about the leaders and they talk about the group and all the things they did and all this kind of stuff.
hmm
Our group, we don't do that. We talk about the individual, and we talk to individuals, and we deal with people on an individual basis. And if it gets carried away, talking too much about the abstract stuff, I always kind of steer it back because I want people to help people, and I want people to encourage people to be, they're going to be okay. And how can we help you get to where you need to be and work
hmm
with people rather than, oh, that damn cult was so bad and look what they did to me. And oh my God, we all know. And we can hear thousands of stories about how bad these cults were and all the things they did to people. Let's deal with the individuals and let's give individual people an opportunity to talk about their individual experiences, because everybody's experience is different. Even
yeah.
people that are in the same groups have had different experiences. I have
hmm
family members that just don't get it, that I went through what I went through. They because they didn't go through it. It was different for them.
hmm
And I'm some kind of a bad guy because I'm telling my story, but the reality of it is that I didn't have an easy time there. I didn't have a good time there, and I was treated terribly. But the thing is that there were others that just didn't go through the same thing. They all
yeah.
left. They all left. So there must have been a reason that they left, but
Yeah.
they didn't have the same reasons that I had. So let's talk to individuals. Let's deal with individuals, and let's help individuals along so that we don't lose more people and we don't have so many people suffering. Uh, I also find that it's important to support people that are being followed, like the we talked about the Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff, like the stuff that goes on behind the scenes after you leave there or try to leave. Oh my God, the harassment and stuff. And the law does nothing about it. Like I'm a big advocate of trying to find ways to talk to the government agencies that are involved, like the judicial, or maybe even go to Congress and talk about it. And in the States, in Canada, we have a different government system, but there's so many people we can talk to that we need to try to get involved in this and understand what's going on and how serious it is. And it's way more important than gender rights or pronouns and things like that, which I'm not belittling. I'm not saying those things aren't somehow important too. I'm not sure they're as important as they're made out to be. But the thing is that those are not nearly as important as saving lives from people who are so depressed because they can't move on with their life because some idiot took their life away from them. Like, we need to deal with some real stuff here.
Mm-hmm. And the way that children are exploited
Absolutely.
and trafficked in these groups. And it's literal trafficking. I think especially the child marriage laws, that to me is trafficking. That is, parents are giving you the okay to be. Most of those marriages are to older men, much older. They're usually young females, majority of them. And the majority of them are also married to men above the age of 18. And it seems like a way to allow trafficking to happen legally.
It is. But the problem is that our legal systems allow for the age of consent to be very young. And they allow for, if parents give consent for marriage, I think girls in Canada can get married at 16 or something if they're permitted by their parents. And it happens. It happens lots. It's not like it doesn't happen at all.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that you could legislate and make a change in that area. However, when it comes to the exploitation in these groups, it can be, these girls don't even have a choice. A lot of them are pushed into it, like they're forced, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I know
they're
you
forced.
had a kind of a unique situation too. Like you ended up with the leader's son or something like that. Was that
it was the leader.
The leader himself. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
He was, yeah. Yeah, he was 37 years older than me,
Yeah.
So it was one of those situations where it was just put on me, right?
Yeah.
It was just one day he was like, you are my person, I am yours, and if you don't marry me, I'm going to kill myself because we're meant to be together. And, so it's so coercive, the whole situation.
Yeah.
And I do think, even though I was legally an adult, like who I am today and who I was then, completely different. And what now compared to then, like you can't even compare it. But having a 20-year-old marrying someone who is very much has been through life, has their brains very much developed. They know exactly what they're doing, and you don't realize that's what's going on. So I think that hits a lot of like ethically shady territory in general.
I think the best approach that we have is to really bring awareness to everything that's going on. People are not aware. People need to be more aware. Andrew, for example, when I was talking to him a few weeks ago, he had no idea that there was over 10,000 cults in the United States. He thought there might be a couple hundred or a few hundred or whatever. He had no idea. And he just about popped a fuse when I told him that. And I love it that he gets so emotional about that. That really means that he's involved and he's into it. And I really appreciate that. That's kind of one of the reasons I really like this guy. But at the same time, if he didn't know, nobody else knows either. Nobody knows. It's just one of those things that nobody talks about. And I really need to, in my push right now, my passion is to make people aware of what's going on. And if people can be more aware of the signs and a woman asked me the other day, what are the signs of a cult? So I posted them I posted what just came to mind rather than just the generic 5 or 6 things that we always talk about. But I wrote a whole bunch of different things that you have to look out for. And I posted that on Facebook, because if you start looking at all of those things, you start realizing, wow, I never really thought about it. But look at every single one of these things line up with the way I was treated and with what I ran into. And
Yeah.
and you can see these things before you go into the cult. So if we can make people more aware and they see these signs, maybe it'll stop people from joining. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of hoping, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's a great point you made earlier about social media and how valuable it is for cult survivors seeking community because, I always had a negative perspective of social media for a long time until I joined those cult survivor groups. And then I was like, wait a minute. And like, look at all these people. I had no idea that there were all these people online. And it's very moving as well because so many of them have been excommunicated from their families,
Yep.
friends. So many of them have no one. And to have the online space and have those people, to find people who can relate to you even, I think that's just an amazing thing. And while the internet and social media does perpetuate cult, that's why you need to have this balance of the opposite end of things where you have people equally speaking out against them.
That's why I was saying Facebook is actually in some ways, it's a very scary, terrible place, but
Hmm.
it also can be used for good. And I like that as well. So we just have to do our best.
Yeah. And I do want to make mention, because you mentioned Andrew. Uh, Andrew, known as Anonymous Andrew, and Melody have a podcast called Cultimatum. It's where I first told my story, and they have this great platform for survivors to tell their stories, and they're just great people. We also did a live stream on there for International Cult Awareness Day, so that is on YouTube, and Cultimatum Podcast YouTube, and Anonymous Andrew YouTube. So for those in the audience who would like to go and check that out, please do. It's just a
Yeah,
quick shout out.
that was a lot of fun. That was actually good. I hope we do
Yeah.
more of those.
I think I love panels, and the feedback I received for doing the panel was how each one of us brought something completely different
Yeah.
to the table, different experiences, different takeaways from our experiences, and it just gives you this big picture.
And something that I want to let everyone know as well too, while we're talking about that, is I've had some people join that have never been in a cult, and they're on there and they're engaging in the conversation, and they're learning, and they're bringing a lot of really helpful information in, and they're surprised that people, they had no idea that people were hurting as bad as they are, and that all of this stuff had gone on. And so these groups are not just for ex-cult members. They can be non-cult
Hmm.
members. Anonymous Andrew, he's never been in a cult, and he's very passionate about this now because he sees what it's done in this world.
Yeah. When you have those interviews with people, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
mind blowing.
Well, I find out that my circumstances were really not that bad after all, because some were just far worse than mine. And I feel so bad. Like, even specifically, I think some of the women, they were very exploited and very hurt, and
Oh yeah.
it's just way worse than any guy could have ever been hurt, because a lot of things don't happen to guys that happen to girls, right? Or if they do, it's much less. It happens less often.
I mean, there are cults that have female leaders and things like that, but it seems that women and children really get the shit
Yep.
end of things. So I like that you bring up legislation too, because I was looking into, before I got on here, just out of curiosity, like what legislation is there? There's not any law at all that says cults are illegal, right? Like cults are legal. They're like laws that regulate more so the behaviors and things within the cult.
Well, when it comes to child, the treatment of children and the exploitation of people and all of those, there are laws that exist, but they apply to everyone. They're very general.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with these groups is that they're so secretive that nobody really knows what's going on inside the group. And what bothers me the most is the fact that governments don't seem to want to investigate anything that has the tag of religion. They just don't really want to go there. They don't, because there's always going to be kickback. There's always going to be people saying, hey, we have rights, we have freedoms, we have this, we have that. Yes, we do. and freedom is very important. It comes down to when the founders of the countries that we're in, Canada and the United States, when they wrote the constitutions or the whatever is in place to protect the citizens, there's no way that they could take into account every single solitary situation and circumstance. So it's pretty wide open. So the courts have had to put in laws that applied here and there. And a good example is seatbelts. There was a time that in your wildest dreams, you wouldn't have thought there could be a law that said you had to wear a seatbelt. And now you just put your seatbelt on. You don't even think about it because it's normal. And people opposed it like crazy. They didn't want that. They thought it was government overreach. You're not allowed to have seatbelts on. So government needs to step up to the plate. But I've spoken to some lawyers and friends of mine that are lawyers, and there's very little that you can do when it comes to that unless the law is broken, a criminal law. And so rape, physical abuse, like literally bruising someone or hurting them or putting them in a hospital, yeah, you can do something about that. But there's very little that protects people from psychological abuse. There's very little that protects people from, for example, exploitation. This guy in California, they went after him for taxes and they put him in jail because he didn't pay taxes. But he was never charged with the fact that he exploited all these people for all those years. And he was never told he had to pay them back for all the hours and money that they put in, because there's no law that says that he has to do that. So there's a fine line there where we can say maybe we can talk to legislators, but I'm more thinking we need to talk to educators. And I know that we need to talk to, if we can teach our children in school that at the age of 6 they can choose their gender, then why can't we teach our children in school that being abused and mistreated is also wrong?
Yeah, we should
we can teach them what exploitation is, and we can teach. See, it also comes back down to the fact that children in school nowadays they still don't learn how to, how to do a bank statement or balance a checkbook, because who ever heard of a checkbook anymore, right? These are things that are gone with the wind, and we need to teach and educate. So maybe education is more the approach as opposed to legislation, because I don't know if legislation is possible. Because as soon as you start legislating things and saying you can't do this, then you're taking the rights away from the good people too, the honest people. And you can't do that in a free society. So we have a bit of a conflict there. But I think if children learn to be able to say no, and they learn to be able to say, hey, I know what exploitation is and it's not going to happen to me. So when they hit that 18, 19, 20, 21, like you were at 21 or 20 or whatever, when you got married, if you would have known and been taught what was right and wrong that way, you would have been able to say, no, I'm not going to do this. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So I think it's education. I think it's important to learn those types of things. I hope that at some point one of our podcasts is actually listened to by somebody who has the authority to do something and contacts one of us and says, hey, what can we do? This is such a big issue, and it's not that it's neglected. It's just not noticed. It's not seen. And that's what I'm advocating for, is we need attention. We need to get attention to all of these people that are suffering and all of these people that are hurting and that have nowhere to go. The thing that really bothers me the most is how many people I've spoken to that had a house, had a car, had a family, had all of this stuff. They go into these groups for 4 or 5 years and they come out with absolutely nothing. And they don't have family support. They don't have anybody supporting them. And then the government looks at them and says, get a job. Like therapists, there are so few therapists that know anything about this type of PTSD. My son suffers from PTSD, and I know what it's like. It's from an injury at an accident that he was in. That is a completely different scenario than the psychological PTSD that most of these people suffer from that have left these groups. And you talk to psychologists and they're stymied. They have no idea. They don't know how to approach it. So they try to use the same techniques like, oh, well, you need to get to bed a little earlier, change your diet, do this, that, and the other thing. That's got nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
It's about rebuilding your life and finding a whole new foundation to build. When your foundation is taken out from underneath you, you have to rebuild all of that in order to be able to stand on your own 2 feet again. And that could take years.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I don't know what it's like where you are, but I know here if you have to go see a therapist, it's costing you 120 to 150 bucks an hour.
Oh yeah.
Government doesn't pay for that.
No, but they should.
Yeah,
I found
well,
mental health is
but they do in some cases, but they don't think that this is a legitimate cause.
right.
We
And
have
I
we have
agree.
to show them that this is a legitimate cause.
You know, there I think it was quite challenging looking into therapists. I'm like, what kind of therapist could help me? You see it maybe like the abuse therapists who specialize in things like that, but that
Yeah.
it would be nice if there was something, because even going to college or going to get your master's or a PhD, I not sure what fields you go into to learn those specific things. Like, as a psychologist, like what would you specialize in, or how would
There
your major
there are
go? What kind of courses do they have?
there are finally a couple of universities in the United States that are adding courses to their therapist training,
Mm-hmm.
to the psychology courses that are specific to religious trauma experiences.
That's good.
And religious trauma, cults are not all religions, but cults are very much, a lot of them are very tied to religion. And it's part of it. They use it to manipulate people, right?
Yeah, it is very similar, like religious trauma. Yeah, it's tough. I like the idea of educating children on exploitation and abuse. Oh my God, because not even just Pulse, but just in general, the abuse
In
that
general,
goes
teaching them that it's okay to say no. And
right.
I think schools have tried that, but there's a lot of pushback on that too, because there's an agenda to a certain political uh, theory that, well, you got to let them find their own way. You can't tell them this and you can't tell them that, but in my opinion, I think that the best way to protect people in general is information. And if you
Mm-hmm.
start giving them information from the time they're very small, you don't have to indoctrinate them and tell them this is
Right.
right and this is wrong. You need to tell them that when somebody's trying to manipulate you, when the bully comes up to you in the schoolyard and wants to take your money away from you, what are you
Yeah.
going to
Yep.
do? How do you handle that? And that's really what cults are about. They're the bully in the room. They
Mm-hmm.
they don't always act that way at first, but at the end of the day, they do. They treat you very much like that.
They're like your best friend who secretly hates you or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Usually it seems like there's some beautiful message and just love and community, and they give you all your basic needs. And
Exactly.
eventually they control all your basic needs, which is food and sex and relationships or whatever it is. Everything is controlled, your housing's controlled. So all your basic needs, you depend on them. And I think that's what messes people up so much when they leave, because
Yeah.
that their very basic survival needs were dependent on the cult. And now you have to figure out how to do that on your own. That was a trial. That was definitely a struggle for me.
So you did it, and that's how you had to survive. You had to do what you had to do to survive, right? But I think it's an education process. I think we need to get people to understand. And religion is really weird. George Carlin, I don't know if you know George Carlin, but a great comedian in many years ago, in my time. And he said, he was talking about hell, and he was saying, this place where you're going to burn and you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to die. You're going to burn for eternity and all this kind of stuff. And it's all because of these 10 commandments that God gave to Moses. And you can't break any one of those 10 commandments. You break any one of those 10 commandments, you're going to go to hell and you're going to burn forever. And you can't have a drink of water and your skin's going to melt off of you. But he loves you. And that's how he
Right.
ended it. But he loves you. And he likes money. He likes money too. Like, you got to give him, he never has enough money, right? And I'm laughing when he said this, but it's so
Right.
true. It's so true. But you said something about the control aspect. You were talking about being excommunicated. And this is
Mm-hmm.
what I tell people about cults when they say to me, how do you recognize a cult? How do you say that? I said, do you know anybody that's ever been in a cult? Yeah, I do. And, well, have they left? Well, no, they were kicked out. Okay, now they were excommunicated. So imagine you have one person or a hierarchy of people in this group that have the ability to tell your husband or your wife, you have to leave now because we don't want you here anymore. And you have no choice. And you have to leave. When anybody has that kind of power, you know that there's a problem.
Yeah.
Nobody
Yep.
should have that kind of power. Nobody should. That's not the right kind of, it's a wrong situation when people have that kind of power.
Yeah. And you literally, marriages are ruined and families are ripped apart. And then you have parents, custody battle going on over the child because, one parent's in a cult and the other one got out. Or
Jehovah's Witnesses, is a lot of the people I talk to are former Jehovah's Witnesses. And I tell you, when you get that letter from them that says you're now an apostate, you're doomed. You lose your kids, you lose your husband, you lose everything. Whether you're a woman, a man, it doesn't matter. You lose it all. And over stupid things like, for example, one person was telling me that their child was sick, needed to have a transfusion, and she decided she was going to allow it.
oh
And
wow,
when the church found out, she was excommunicated. And guess what? They kept the husband and they kept the kid. And she lost her kid, she lost her husband. The kid is now something like 14 years old and she hasn't seen him in 6 years. And I'm saying, like, what? Any group that has that kind of power, any group that has that kind of authority, that group, the government should shut down, period. Take away their tax-free status, for crying out loud. Make them be a business at least. Then they'll go out of business because they don't know how to run a business without free money.
exactly.
So,
Taking away tax exemption status from religions would solve
a lot of
so many problems. It is absurd that we even still have this in place. It is a business.
But it's because we have a society that was based on religion. North America was built on Christianity.
It was.
Christianity, a lot of what whether we follow those traits or not, but even our laws are still based on the basic moral 10 commandments. I mean,
Yeah.
they're expanded quite a bit and they're more defined, but thou shalt not kill means you can't murder. You can't do this. Thou shalt not steal. You can't steal. So we do that. But, the reality of it is that we have religion, and religion has slowly been being weaned out of society in so many different ways, including in the U.S. Constitution, where they tried to separate church and state.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's time now to seriously take a look at religion and say, nah, you can still have a church, but you're not going to have tax-free status anymore. You're going to pay taxes like everybody else, because
Absolutely.
there are churches. I'm not going to mention the name because we'd be talking for the next 2 hours. But there's a couple of churches in the United States that have literally tens of thousands of members, where the pastors are multi-millionaires and they own their own private airplanes. And one particular one, when he's in the camera, he looks like the devil himself looking at you. And
I know exactly who you're talking about.
I won't mention names because I don't want to get sued. But the reality of it is that why is the government not doing anything about this? And what the funny thing is that then you've got these particular pastors that are so filthy rich. They get invited to the White House to pray with the president when the president wants to get on his knees and show the world that he's a Christian. And these are the biggest con men on the planet,
Yeah,
So,
the prayer breakfast.
Yeah.
Like, why do we have a prayer breakfast? I just,
it's because there's still a religious right that everybody wants to get the vote from, right? There still are a lot of religious people, and there's nothing wrong with being. I'm not I'm anti-religious. I'm not social. I think there's a lot of people that need to have that
I do too.
feeling of community and that feeling of social life. And you were talking about how churches have changed. I don't think religion has changed, but a lot of churches have changed. And the churches have realized that people are getting tired. Like, you go into a Catholic church now, many Catholic churches, on a middle of a mass, and there's maybe 30 people in this great big building because people just don't go anymore. So they have to make it more exciting. So they bring in the rock bands and they do all this kind of stuff. It's still religion and it's still church. It's not that they're, and very few of them, like a lot of the more modern churches, are much freer. So if you decide to come on Sunday, you can come. And if you don't come for 3 weeks, they're not going to hassle you for not coming. So that's okay. So go to a group like that. It's like going to a lodge and having a bowling league or whatever. But religion is attached to it. I understand that. What I don't like is these religions that control your life. Tell you how to eat, tell you how to dress, tell you how to wear your hair, tell you who you can be friends with and who you can't be friends with, how far you can travel. We don't live in North Korea. And yet,
Exactly.
and yet some of these religions are stricter than North Korea, for crying out loud.
Oh, I feel that. Yeah, like, people don't have rights in these groups. And what's crazy is anyone could just buy a church and start a church. Like,
You could do it in your living room.
right.
know?
Where's the regulations on that level? It just seems it is very underregulated. I think I think it depends on the church, though, whether or not pastors get background checks and fingerprints. I'm not 100%
I
sure.
don't think they do at all in Canada.
Really?
I've never even heard of that before. So
So I was looking into it a little while ago, and I can't remember. I think it just would depend on the church, because I was reading some churches require it. And it should be just straight up required in general, right? Like, your
well,
pastors.
it's not even just the church. I mean, look at gyms. Look at in Canada, we had the Canadian junior hockey. There was a big scandal in junior hockey where all these young hockey players were abused physically, sexually, all kinds of sexual favors just to be able to play in games and stuff like that. And this all came about over a period of time. The point of the matter is, though, that the legislation didn't protect anybody from that. So now governments are starting to recognize that these things need to be regulated and watched. And so coaches now have to go through much rigorous training. Pastors should be exactly the same thing. Especially certain churches where there's a history of this kind of thing. When you look at the Catholic Church, what's the one thing in the Catholic Church that makes their priests pedophiles? The fact that none of them can have a wife. They're not allowed to get married. So what do? They're natural, they're normal, they're going to have the urges. So they find it somewhere else, and they end up hurting kids, because kids are the easy and vulnerable target.
Yeah, what's been going on in the Catholic Church is insane.
Well, and what bothers me about the Catholic Church is that, yeah, they've sort of apologized for what happens and stuff like that. But for years and years, the Catholic Church just shuffled people around, shuffle. But our group that we were in did the same thing. We had a guy on our farm that was having a relationship with a 17-year-old girl, and he was married with couple 2 or 3 kids, and he was an elder. And when it was found out that they were having sex in the garage together, in the shop, he and his wife and kids would just move to another farm. It was just shuffled away,
Yeah.
And of course, there's no. I'm not saying that the girl needed therapy. I'm not saying that she was messed up because of it, because I don't know. But I do know that when there's emotions involved in a relationship, I'm pretty sure that a 17-year-old girl would have had some emotions there involved. And so there's that kind of stuff to deal with as well. And there was no therapist there or anything. It was just, shut up, don't talk about it. It's over,
Right.
And I just don't understand that. It's those people that are in a position of power, those people that are in a position where we're told we have to respect them. And when it happened to me, the guy that assaulted me, I was told, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to hear about it. Well, why not? Well, because first of all, they didn't believe me that it happened. And the second thing is that they then said, well, but if it did happen, it's going to destroy him. He won't be able to do his his youth group anymore. He won't be able to do this anymore.
Right.
What? So when I was 46 years old, when my dad finally said to me, that he actually did some investigation on his own, and he found out that what I told him was absolutely true. And he apologized to me. He said, I wish I would have believed you. And I said, yeah, I kind of wish you would have believed me too.
Yeah.
A little too late now. Oh, God will take care of it. God will take care of it.
Right. It's like you're so gone. You're not, and they just protect.
Well, and then the guy that did this to me got into a car accident and went through the windshield of his car and got all cut up and had stitches all over his face, and he was in really bad shape. My dad had to phone me and tell me, oh, see, I told you God would take care of it. Like, give me a break. Like, Dad, for crying out loud, what, I couldn't believe that,
Yep. God is very vengeful, and
yeah.
it appears that way.
A lot of times I just don't understand their thought process, but it is what it is, right? You have to live with it.
It's just like self-confirming thoughts, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That confirms that God is in control and handling things here.
Yeah. God took care of it, yeah.
Yeah, and we have a tendency, I think, the thing with human beings and the way that our minds work, like we have tendencies to uh make or like notice patterns in the environment, make connections in the environment, and so things like that. I'm sure in his brain was like a pattern, a connection that he could make,
Yep.
to maintain his beliefs. I do want to go back to your story though. How old were you when you like left complete when you were just done?
I was 15. It was 2 months before
Oh,
2 months before my 16th birthday.
okay, so it was when you were 15. Okay. So, but wait, were your family still living there?
Yeah, my family was still there. My oldest brother had already left, but he had left with the blessing of the group because he was working in Edmonton, and he was staying in one of the community houses that the community had. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a group home where there was a whole bunch of people living in, sharing bedroom with four guys, and there must have been 20 people living in the house, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And
Mm-hmm.
he lived there for a while yet after I left, and then eventually he and I got a place together, and we just separated our ways completely. So
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah. Wow. So that's pretty wild. Your family probably didn't take it very well either.
I don't know if they took it well or not. My mother laughed at me and she told me they're going to change your diaper and send you home, and I don't know what she meant by that. To this day, I can't really figure it out. And my dad didn't get upset or anything. He just kind of looked at me and said, "Well, you're going to become an alcoholic, and they're going to find you dead in a back alley, and you're going to be a drug addict, and it's not going to take very long."
Wow.
And that was his way of probably trying to scare me one last time. But
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't his words that helped me leave. It was my mom. When she laughed at me, that gave me the last final push that I needed to get out of there. It was the big
Yeah.
F you, right?
Right.
Except that I didn't know that word at that time. So
And and then you ended up, now you do all kinds of advocacy. Um, so I do want to shout out your podcast that's coming soon, right?
yes, yeah,
Silent Voices.
yeah.
So do you think you'll be launching that?
I'm hoping within about 2 weeks. I have about 5 episodes done already, and
Nice. Yeah.
and I just have them sitting there and archived. And I want to be able to start releasing them on a regular, like always, like say every Thursday night or something like that. So I want to have enough episodes in the hopper so that if I miss a week, if I go on holidays or anything like that, and I miss a week, I can just upload another one, and it continues. So people get into the habit of seeing one come on every week, like a TV
Yeah.
episode, right? But I have the podcast, but I'm finding that I have a Facebook page, I have a Facebook group, I have an Instagram group, and I have the podcast, and I have a new book coming out called Silent Voices, and all 5 of them are silent voices. So it's
Oh,
kind
nice.
of it's branding, and it's getting that out there. The new book is an extremely interesting book. It's really evolved over time because I was just going to originally just talk about cults and explain what cults are, and then talk about a whole bunch of different cults and find out as much information as I could and fill the book with information. That ended up being like a quarter of the book. Now
Mm-hmm.
it's evolved into interviewing people like yourself, and I start telling bits and pieces of everybody's stories, and I've kind of knit it all together as to how all of the stories are so similar and how much pain people are going through, and but it's specific to individuals, but it's also very general.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. And so the book is I'm actually liking it. It's coming together really well. Uh,
Yeah.
and I've kind of delayed it a little bit because I was going to release it in September, but because I'm interviewing people, I've interviewed 114, 115 people now. And I'm not, there's a lot of people that don't want their names to be mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just being anonymously referenced in the book. And, I was told this, I was told this, I was told this. And I will respect everyone in that way. Like in our group, we do especially the private group on Facebook. Everything
Mm-hmm.
that goes on there stays there. It's like Vegas. It happens in Vegas. It stays in Vegas. No,
Yep.
to me, it's very important that people feel safe and secure and know that what we talk about is. So I'm not going to release names in the book unless somebody says to me, "Hey, I don't mind if you put my name in there." In fact, in the book, I'll mention like Melody. I'll put her podcast in there and a link to that so people can find it. And I think that's really important because she's actually an admin in my group as well now. And I'm finding that's really good because there's a lot of times I'm at work during the day. And we had this one lady just came in a couple of days ago, and she was just desperate to talk to somebody. And I was at work and I couldn't do anything. And she just stepped in and started speaking to this girl and then invited her to her group so they could talk privately. And I love having that backup and support in our group as well with people that I trust. And she's a very intelligent lady, and she really understands the whole concept of the PTSD and the effect that cults have on people, and I respect that. So,
Oh yeah, I love Melody.
yeah,
I literally was saying this the other day because she's just there. She's there for you, and
she
she just
listens.
is
Yeah,
such a genuine
yeah,
person. Again, Melody is co-host of Cultimatum podcast, and I love them. Melody does so much for cult survivors. She does so much, and I think it's amazing what she does. Really, you don't realize what people are really doing behind the scenes because you have your podcast and your page, but then behind the scenes you got messages going. You're talking to people like she's so, and you yourself, you guys are so engaged in that
well,
community.
and I'm kind of privileged in a way because I work for myself, and so during the day I do have the opportunity of checking my phone quite often, and I don't have to worry about firing myself. So, so
Yep.
I can check my phone quite often, and a lot of times if it's someone that just wants to say hi, I'm not going to chat with them. But there are people that come on that are just in pain, like unbelievable, and they're lost and they don't know what to do. And I've seen lots of suicides in this, and that really worries me when somebody's like that because I start thinking, if I don't say something, if I don't intervene, if I don't step in and kind of help a little bit. So now I've got people I can start passing them off to and say, check with so-and-so because I think she may have the available time, or check with so-and-so. He might be able to talk to you right now, but I'm, and so that's kind of cool. And I like doing that. I
Right.
do feel like we've become a landing place for people that really need to find a place where they feel safe.
Oh yeah. And that's what's beautiful about it. So what got you started in the advocacy space? And like at what point after leaving did you decide to do this kind of work?
Well, in 1996, I started writing my book, the book that
Okay.
is released now. I released it in 2019. I refused to release it in 2020. I didn't want to release it until my parents were gone because I knew that my parents just would not understand why I would tell the story. I didn't really, when I wrote the book, my family got really mad at me because they thought that the story shouldn't be told. Ironically, People Magazine did an interview with me. They flew me to New York
Oh,
and
you
they actually
did?
put me on Discovery ID and they interviewed me. And they said, unfortunately, because of some of the information that I had given them, they had to have it verified. So I gave them my oldest sister's phone number and they called her and they said they talked to her for a period of time and she verified everything I said. But they still said that I was lying, so come on. Like, I told my story the way that I lived it. And I feel bad that my family did that to me. But when my family did that to me is when I started really realizing how the ongoing trauma affects people. And that's when I started saying, I need to do something about this. I need to really get involved a lot more. So I started talking and I started going and I started getting into these cult awareness groups on Facebook and everything. And then one day I just thought, I'm going to start my own because I'm doing this book and I've been reading about branding. And so I'm trying to brand this Silent Voices thing. And
Nice.
it's not just going to be about cults. It's going to be about anybody that has a story they have to tell they've been hurt psychologically or physically in any way. So it's much bigger than just cults, but the cults is such a big part of my world that I'm bringing a lot of those people into it too. So that's kind of where the advocacy started.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And so it's Swindled by Faith is your first book, right?
Swindled by Faith is there now. It's available on Amazon, right? And I do post the links and stuff on our pages regularly, so people can go on there and find it. The new book is called Silent Voices. So it's really again, just an offshoot of everything that we're doing, the advocacy group that we have on Facebook at
Yeah.
this point. So
And that is a great idea too. I was going to say that earlier. Interviewing different, just bringing a big picture of everything. That I think that's a great idea. Like that's going to be a really interesting book because it will you'll be able to see the patterns
yeah,
in all these different people's experiences.
yeah.
And once you see the pattern, it's hard to unsee it, the pattern of abuse. But yeah, I think that's a really great idea. It takes a lot of courage, especially to tell your story in general, but especially, when you have pushback from your family, like that's definitely got to be tough. Or pushback from anyone who's,
You know what? The reality of it is, it's exactly the same as coming out of the cult.
yeah.
You end up with a void that you have to fill. So what am I doing? I'm filling that void with people that I do love and people that care about me and my friends. And I have a lot of love in my life, and I'm very, very happy right now with everything that's going on. So I have a friend that lives in Victoria, for example, that phones me. If I don't hear from him once a week, if he doesn't hear from me once a week, he's checking on me to find out what's going on. They had a big storm there last night that almost blew the Pacific Northwest off of the face of the earth. And I talked to him before the storm, and I talked to him after the storm just to make sure he was okay. And, these are the relationships that I really like, because they're real relationships. And I don't care about the phony, I have to be your friend because you're my brother or you're my sister. I'm way beyond that now. I have family that I love. I have extended family that I love very much, that love me and don't, we don't play into that game, and I'm not going to play into that game. They're more than welcome to come back into my life anytime they want, but that's where it is. I'm not interested in being treated the way that I was treated in the group.
I love listening and hearing about this. I think it's really interesting to hear because you're obviously very knowledgeable. And so you've educated yourself on, especially like the legislation and things like that. I think that's just great. It really makes me think about things too, with education, especially with philosophy, right?
Yep.
Incredible. I was like, maybe we could set something up, like a seminar or a lecture, or just like and a little thing about coercion and critical thinking and cults, from the
Yeah.
philosophy department.
I really think that is, I've thought about that a lot in the last 6 months. I really think that that's the approach we need to take. I don't know if there's that much we can do with legislation. I do know that we should be working with psychology departments, philosophy departments, those types of departments to teach to teach therapists that come out how to be able to understand and deal with this kind of thing. That's the biggest thing that I find with the people I talk to. I can't find a therapist that understands me. I can't find a therapist that knows anything about cults. In fact, some of them don't even believe they just think that it's all imaginary. You're making this up in your head. And that's just not good therapy. That's not helping anybody.
That's true.
So we have to work in that aspect, but then we need to take a look at the younger education, teaching kids. We can teach kids that, when I was in school, we used to have to get under our desk and drop because we were hiding from a nuclear bomb, right? Had to get under the bed, under the couch. And we learned that in school. So why can't we teach somebody in school that it's not okay to be assaulted? It's not okay to be beat up. It's not okay for somebody to say to you, don't tell anybody, this is a secret. The minute they tell you that, you should know that it's a problem. And kids need to understand that.
We need children's books.
And then when yeah. But then when they hit that age of 20, 18, 19, 20, 21, and they're still influenced, a lot of kids at that age think that they're mature adults and, you can't influence me, but you're still very vulnerable at that age and very easy to influence. And
so vulnerable.
But you have now some knowledge that you can take with you as you go along, just like your mathematics and your English and your sciences and stuff. You also have some social strengths, And it's not just in cults. It's not just about cults. It's about anything to do with being exploited, being abused, being treated badly,
what grooming looks like.
Exactly.
What,
Exactly. And
Especially for children, because they are so susceptible to, their brains are so malleable, and they, grooming happens. It's quite prevalent.
yeah. And it's not just in the cults. It's in general too. The cults are a little bit exceptionally bad because you're so isolated. You become so isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're isolated, you're not safe. And children are not safe in isolation. It's just the way it is. That's the one pattern that I'm finding with everybody is when there was the more the isolation was, the more abuse happened.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the types of things that we need to be warning people about. This is not good. This is not safe. This is not right for kids. I've said that at the end of almost every podcast that I've done, and people have said to me, "Okay, so what's the one thing you can tell people?" The one thing I tell people is watch how they treat the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Watch
I
how
agree.
it's very simple. Watch how they treat the kids. Because if they treat the kids with disrespect and they treat the kids abusively and if they do serious corporal punishment and they're grabbing the kid by the ear to lift them off the floor when the kid does something wrong. I mean, my dad used to do that. Oh my God, that hurt.
Wow. Yeah.
But the thing is that those are things that are wrong. And when a group does that and when they advocate that, stay
Mm-hmm.
away from it. Run as fast as you can. Don't go there because that is wrong. And
Right.
I'm not a religious person, but there's one thing that Jesus said. Bring the children to me, right? Jesus cared about kids, according to the Bible, and that's
Yeah.
what they believe in. So let them believe that that's the case. If that's the case, then make the kids the priority. Kids are a
Right.
priority.
Absolutely. And they don't have a voice in this world.
They do
They
not.
can't vote. They, we are the voice of the children.
And they depend on us to
Yeah.
steer them in the right direction, but not only that, to protect them. And we need
Mm-hmm.
to protect them. And I'm not into this, I think the legislation has gone too far. We're talking about legislation. I think in some cases it's gone too far because the government has the ability to walk into your home and take your kids away from you if you do something wrong. I don't know that that's necessarily always the right thing to do. What I
Mm-hmm.
think is it's an education process from the time young families, a guy and a girl get married. They know absolutely nothing about having kids. Why are there not courses available that they can learn about parenting?
Right.
Like here, you're going to get married. You want to have a marriage license and a marriage certificate. You got to take this course, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't see why.
Especially,
I mean, we can force people to do everything else. Why can't we say you got to take this course?
right, get educated.
Learn how to be a parent. Learn how to recognize bad things and good things, and take care of your kids properly and do this kind of stuff. Especially some people are just natural parents, but some people are not.
I love kids, they're so innocent, and it's literally drives me crazy that any of these things are a situation. I just can't, like, a 12-year-old should never have to know those kinds of struggles, or having to work full time doing hard labor, right? Where you guys were doing hard labor?
Shovel and pick, building roads. Think about it.
You're on a farm, yeah.
Yeah.
Did they have like girls doing
Yeah, it was the
cooking and
boys did the hard, like the road work and all that kind of stuff. The girls did all the cooking, cleaning, and all that stuff, the laundry and stuff. The girls worked hard too, believe me. We had a kitchen once we got the farm put together. We had this common kitchen where everybody, an eating building, everybody ate together. We cooked together all at the same time. And these young girls at very young ages had to get up at 4 a.m. to cook breakfast for everybody.
Mhm.
And they would work a full day too. They didn't get a chance to have it off either. They worked too, and they had to learn how to bake, and they had to learn how to cook, and they had to learn how to clean. And nowadays you put everything in a wash machine, and turn the timer on, and it's done. Back then it was all done by hand.
Oh, hand
The farm,
washing.
our water was
Right.
drawn from a well. So like this is not easy work, and these girls worked hard too. Well, I'll tell you, they worked hard.
Oh, I could only imagine, and you shouldn't have to know. That should never be your life, like that shouldn't be a child's life. Even just the way that kids sit in classrooms like all day long, the way that they do is too, like, a lot. I think kids need to have fun. They need some free time. They need some You
Well,
know, like
I'll tell you
some
what.
good recess and
When you look at the curriculum system in Japan, and you wonder why their children are some of the smartest kids in the world, it's because number one, they look at the child and they teach them only what the child is good at, right from the time that they're little. So if a child in grade 2 or 1 is showing that they're good at mathematics, they're going to teach them mathematics. If they're in grade 5, if they're really good at science, they're going to lean them into a science, and they're going to teach them all the science stuff. English
right.
or languages, it's going to all go into languages. But so when they go to school, they're not learning about gender, and they're not learning about environment, and they're not learning about all the stuff that are politically motivated here in Canada and the United States. They're learning about curriculum, and that's it: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And when they learn that stuff, then they get to do other things as well. So they're learning games that they play together that are competitive. They're learning how to be competitive. They're learning how to be how to think about the next move, what to do. So then by the time they're 20 years old, they're all smart. They all have a
Yeah,
great education but then you have the doctor who was leaned into being a doctor from the time he was a little kid because that's what he was good at. And you've got the steel worker that knows how to do steel work because he learned it from being a little kid. And it's just the right way to do education. We do it wrong here. We
yeah,
keep everybody at the same level. You have all your grade 5 students, and
yes.
every week they have to turn in a certain amount of homework that's done exactly the same thing. The answers have to be identical. Everything has to be the same. Yeah, it's easier for the teachers,
Right. But everyone, yeah, exactly. You
but
can't,
on the scale and in the education system, you should know more than anyone. In one classroom alone, you can have a 1 to 100 scale in there when it comes to the level of intelligence or the level of ability to do something or complete a task. It's so different from one child to another. But we don't
exactly.
recognize that in North America. And that's
Yeah,
one of the big problems. That's why we're like, the United States is like 176th or something on the level of education scores in the world. Like, that is terrible. That's terrible.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so if that's the case, why is nothing being done about it? So the whole education system needs to be restructured, but that's another
right.
story for another night. We need to make life easier for kids, not tougher. But we also need to protect them, and we need to find ways to do that. And cults are dangerous. They're hurtful, and they cause lifelong damage to people. That
Yep.
just doesn't go away. And the ones that claim that they don't, it never did anything. Like, I have brothers and sisters that claim, you got to get over it. It never did anything to me. I'm sure that it did something to them. They just don't talk about it.
Yeah. Or maybe they're still processing it, and maybe don't realize. I feel like a lot of people don't realize what they went through was abuse. But sometimes you don't see it. It can take a long time. My interviews with the ex-members from my cult who I recruited, they were like some of my best friends in life too, and I recruited them and they joined us and everything. Doing their interviews was eye-opening for me to hear because even though you're all there and you're all together, like, we are having two completely different experiences, and to hear their experiences and what they went through, even in the same group and everything is, we're all living together and everything. I learned so many things I just didn't even know.
I know by the reaction of my family that my experience was very different from theirs, because a lot of them they just flat out call me a liar and say that I'm not telling the truth. I've got no reason to lie. I'm not trying to look for glory in this,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be some kind of a hero. I see people hurting and I want to help people, and it doesn't make me any money, so I don't know
You're
what.
stating the facts,
Yeah.
and truth telling is tough. It's a dangerous thing
But
to do.
I have a younger sister that was born in the group, and she left when she was 18, and she's done so well for herself, like, and extremely proud of everything that she's achieved in her life, and yet, her life was so different, because I remember her when she was a teenager. Like, she could sit on my dad's lap and put her arms around him and laugh with him and have fun with him. Well, that wasn't the dad that I grew up with. He was so different. So So I understand her anger and thinking that it makes my dad look not so good in my book. The reality of this, she never knew the dad that I knew.
Right.
He was born after I left.
Yeah.
So,
And they're
and my dad was getting a lot older, and I'm sure that he simmered down with his attitude as well. And so
yeah.
I understand. I understand that. I understand why she thinks that, that she'd be upset that I kind of gave a picture of my dad being the person that he was. Even though I don't really put my dad down, what I do is I tell what happened to me, and anybody in their right mind should know that a parent should never let that happen to their child. So yeah, it makes my
100%.
parents look a little bit like they didn't do a very good job, but they loved us. They loved us to the best of their ability. They thought to the day they died that they were doing right. They were doing the right thing.
Yeah. And they were victims at the end of the day.
At the end of
or
the
they're
day, just like everybody else, yes.
And that's what it does to you. You don't even know what you're doing or what you're doing is wrong. And
The worst part is they had everything taken away from them, even their family. At the end of
yeah,
the day, they had nothing left. Like, we all tried to have a relationship with them, but it wasn't a real family dynamic relationship.
yeah,
You could never have a Christmas dinner with them because they weren't allowed to celebrate Christmas. So like those things didn't happen, right? So it was
right.
just, you could phone them and talk to them on the phone, and we did eventually have a bit of a relationship that way, but it was never a real family dynamic.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, I'm sure lots of changes happened to you over the years. It was really nice talking to you. It's really interesting what you went through and just, your knowledge in general. You have a lot of knowledge on all of everything about it, everything about the cult experience, and also the things that you know about legislation. Your ideas, like, you have great ideas.
Well, I hope as a group we can take some things forward, and it's hard to do by myself, and I'm starting to line myself up with other people that are feeling the same way, and they're doing the same thing and working hard as well. So that's kind of the purpose here.
Yeah, exactly.
And I hope that it happens. I mean, my group, I only
Yeah.
started it like 6 weeks ago, and we're at 107 members or something now already, the private group. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. It's growing very fast, and yeah, let's keep this moving. Let's keep this thing going, and let's help people break out of this stuff.
Absolutely. So, well, I appreciate you being here and talking with me. I think that this was all really interesting, and you have a very inspiring story, and what you're doing is um is going to inspire change. We're setting that things up for
Exactly.
progress, and that's where it all begins. So, yeah, is there anything else that you want to say or share with the
No,
audience?
I'm good at this point. Like, this has been great. I enjoyed our conversation,
Yeah.
and let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. And so for the audience, shout out to your Facebook page at Silent Voices.
Yes,
So those of you
there's a
interested.
page and a private
What-
group.
Okay. And they're all the same
Everything is the
name.
same name.
You said
Yes,
that
everything
earlier.
is the same.
Okay. So definitely keep an eye out for Silent Voices, Richard's new book that will be coming out, and his new podcast, which I'm sure will be really interesting. I definitely looking forward to it myself. And, I appreciate everything. Appreciate you being
Yes,
here. And,
and
it's been
and
fun.
make sure that you get your copy of Swindled by Faith as well. You'll really appreciate that one. And when you do read it, give me a review if you liked it. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Yes, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for being here. I appreciate you and your time and everything that you're doing. I think it's awesome and it's definitely inspiring. And so with that, I think we're going to close out
Okay.
now. So
Thank you.
thank you, everyone, for watching Disillusion Podcast, and I will see you next time.